A Sunday afternoon turns terrifying for two young brothers when a frozen pond collapses beneath them. As they struggle for their lives, rescuers race to the scene.
Time is very important in a situation like this. I knew we had to get him quickly.
But with each minute in the frigid water, emergency personnel fear for their survival.
I wasn't coming out until we found him.
Fighting hypothermia, doctors attempt to revive the boys.
These kids looked dead, they felt dead, and they were cold and stiff.
To save two innocent lives, rescuers find themselves walking on thin ice. December 10th, 1995. In Warwick, Rhode Island, temperatures had fallen into the low 20s for 3 straight days, transforming the landscape. At a neighborhood pond, snow covered a deceptively thin sheet of ice. It would take 3 more days at 20 degrees until the pond would be safe to walk on. Before then, it would present a danger too many parents have had to face. The second leading cause of death for children under 15, drowning. And dozens of children live nearby. The pond was 2 blocks from the home of 9-year-old Tommy Martini and his younger brother Christopher. They planned to spend the rest of the Sunday afternoon outdoors with their friend Eddie Cadonian. Tracy Martini warned her son Christopher not to go near the pond. She knew from her experience the ice was still too thin.
That'll be fun.
Christopher promised to stay away from the pond. His brother promised to look after him. Their play soon turned into a snowball fight. Christopher took off running. His path led him to the pond. It seemed solid enough, but water does not freeze at a uniform rate. Frequently, ice is thinnest at the center of a pond. When nothing happened, Christopher grew bolder. Christopher dared them to come out. With each jump, he weakened the ice beneath him. He refused their pleas to get off the pond. Eddie ran to tell his mother. Suddenly, the ice cracked open, plunging Christopher into the frigid water. The cold was so intense, it took his breath away. Eddie ran home as Tommy tried to get to his brother. Christopher struggled to climb out, but he was unable to grasp the edge. The ice kept breaking off. Eddie told his mother that Christopher had fallen through the ice. She called 911. In the 34-degree water, Christopher's small body cooled rapidly. Just when he needed them most, his muscles became stiff and his reflexes sluggish. Tommy was 7 pounds heavier than his brother.
Chris, come on!
He was aware the ice may not hold him. But it was a chance he had to take. Christopher needed his help. Warwick Fire Station 8 was less than 1.5 miles away. At 3:05 that afternoon, a call came in that someone had fallen through the ice. Firefighter Michael Moen was on the first rescue truck out of the station.
As soon as the call came in, my heart was racing. Most of the calls we go on are car accidents, a lot of medical runs, fires. Very rarely do we get an ice rescue.
He hoped his training in ice rescues would make a difference that day. Eddie's mom gave Tracy Martini the bad news.
What? Chris!
Christopher had been in the icy pond for less than 2 minutes, yet he could barely keep his head above water. His heart and respiratory rates continued to slow. Tommy reached out, stretching his hand as far as he could across the gap that separated him from his brother.
Please, grab my hand!
It wasn't enough. The ice broke. Tommy tried to keep Christopher afloat. But as his body reacted to the cold, he found it difficult to stay above the water himself. Neighbors responded to the boy's frantic cries. They too had no way of reaching them without falling through the ice. Gradually, Tommy's and Christopher's cries grew weaker. The intense cold of the water was taking its toll. The 2 young boys had less than 5 minutes before they were unconscious. In the back of the truck, Moen put on a rubber exposure suit. It would shield him from the cold and keep him buoyant in the water. Calls from panicked neighbors continued to pour in.
Time is very important in a situation like this. I knew we had to get him quickly. We turned the corner to the street. There were people on the shore waving their arms. The adrenaline just started flowing.
At 3:15, Moen and his team arrived at the pond. Rescuers quickly learned from neighbors that 2 boys had fallen in. Paramedic Anthony Mello.
It was not until the first units arrived on the scene that we knew exactly how serious it was. We realized there may be another child submerged.
As firefighter Moen moved towards the hole, he was uncertain what happened to the 2 brothers.
And I had to get on to my hands and knees and kind of crawl out there to kind of disperse my weight across the ice so I wouldn't fall through. I can see two gloves that were grabbing onto the ice as if they were holding on. And I thought, there's the victim. The ice just broke up. I fell through and I saw that the gloves weren't attached to anybody. They were attached to the ice and that was it.
Moen realized that both boys were submerged under the ice. This posed a problem because the exposure suit had limited capabilities.
The suits are designed for going out and getting somebody who's floating on the water, but not under the water.
In order to get below the surface, Moen propelled himself out of the water, and then, using his arms, he tried to force himself down.
It was a murky pond. It was probably like a 1 to 2 foot visibility tops. I was pushing down the water and just trying to feel for something.
But the exposure suit was too buoyant. He needed to go deeper. He had to figure out how, and fast. On board the ambulance, Lieutenant Richard Bellavance prepared to treat what he knew would be severe hypothermia, a body temperature below 95 degrees Fahrenheit.
On the way to the run, I'd set the heat up to a high temperature, prepare blankets, IV fluids, putting them in front of a heat vent to warm them up a little bit, because hypothermia is going to be the biggest problem.
Somewhere in the dark depths beyond Moen's reach, the boys were drowning in the frigid water. They had been submerged for almost 15 minutes.
The water just starts funneling down your suit, and you lose your buoyancy, which helped. It helped you go down deeper into the water where you can almost touch bottom. I was in a panic situation where I knew we had to get him quickly.
Using all his strength, Moen surged up and dove down into the water. For the brief moment he touched bottom, he kicked around, hoping his feet would touch the boys. His buoyant suit then pulled him to the surface, where he repeated the process again and again. After 10 minutes, he was exhausted.
I had no clue how long I was in the water. I mean, the time was frozen. I would have stayed out there until someone yanked me out of the water. Someone was going to have to physically get me and take me out of the water because I wasn't coming out until we found him.
Rescuers knew the danger Moen faced every second he was in the water. Paramedic Rick Bellavance.
When you're dealing with the ice rescue, you're putting the rescuers in the same environment as the victims, and anything goes wrong with their equipment, they become a victim as opposed to a rescuer.
At the pond's edge, neighbors were helpless to assist rescuers. They could only watch and wait. With every passing second, Tracy Martini's fear for her sons grew. She knew that unless rescuers found them soon, there was little chance they would be found alive. In Warwick, Rhode Island, a sudden drop in the temperature created a dangerous situation on a neighborhood pond. Two brothers had fallen through the deceptively thin ice. After a few minutes in the freezing water, they could struggle no more. The fire department responded, but found that the boys had sunk to the bottom.
Right here, that one right here.
As neighbors gathered to watch and wait, the rescuers struggled to reach the children. Unable to dive due to the buoyancy of his exposure suit, firefighter Michael Moen kept probing the depths with his feet. The boy's mother waited anxiously for any news. Her sons had been underwater for close to 20 minutes. To help with the rescue, firefighter Michael Clark put on an exposure suit. He knew Moen was going to need some help.
I jackknifed down and I kicked something which felt like a tire tube, and I said, it's gotta be him. I worked him up to my arms. I got a good grasp on him.
I got him!
When I found the victim, he just was lifeless.
Moen had found 9-year-old Tommy.
As soon as I said, I've got him, there was 20 guys on the line, and they're pulling me in. The rope snapped. And now I'm in the water with this victim and no means of getting in the shore.
When the line broke, Clark knew he had to do something.
It was just devastating to see that happen, because now I'm looking at not 2 victims, but 2 people out there that are helpless. I know Mike was okay because he had the suit on, but Tommy definitely needed serious medical attention.
With his lifeline securely attached, Clark scrambled across the ice and grabbed Tommy. The instant he was safely in Clark's arms, the rescue team hauled them both in.
Until you actually have a lifeless 9-year-old boy in your arms, not breathing, no pulse, I can't explain what that feels like.
Tommy wasn't breathing. Deathly pale, he showed no response. His pupils were fixed, and he had no pulse. With Christopher still in the water, the crisis took on proportions much greater than anyone first realized. Paramedic Charles Donnellan.
They realized the intensity of what we had. I think they started calling for more apparatus, more rescues. We just needed more manpower because we had to get a lot of guys out there on the ice.
Even as Moen was joined by 2 other rescuers, the hole in the ice was widening, making it more difficult to tell where the boys had fallen in.
Anything?
7-year-old Christopher had been in the water for 25 minutes. Donnellan knew they needed to warm up Tommy quickly.
First thing you want to do is stop the cold. You want to increase heat. Our truck was quite warm at the time because we had cranked the heat up. So immediately we're starting to warm the body up.
Donnellan inserted an endotracheal tube and began to ventilate Tommy's lungs by pumping the pond water out. The 9-year-old's veins were small and the cold had left them constricted, but Rick Bellavance managed to start an IV. The paramedics detected some heart activity, but felt no pulse in his extremities. Tommy was alive, but barely. Eddie Cadonian ran for help when Christopher fell through the ice. Now, he could only hope for the best.
I didn't know what to do. It was terrifying. I don't think I've ever been so scared.
Bellavance called Hasbro Children's Hospital 5 miles away in Providence. He wanted to inject epinephrine into Tommy's IV line in an effort to re-establish a pulse.
Come on, Tommy. What's your ETA?
Dr. Slim Sooner, chief resident in emergency medicine, gave his consent for the drugs.
All right, we'll see you in 15 minutes. The trauma room will be ready. All right, everybody, gather around.
He then readied his staff to receive the young victim.
I've been involved in these type of resuscitations, but only in adult patients. At that time, I hadn't seen many children who were hypothermic. And when there are multiple kids involved, we knew this was going to take a lot of resources.
The paramedics were forcing air into Tommy's lungs. Into a saline IV, they injected medications to stimulate his heart. But the cardiac monitor continued to show arrhythmic activity. The muscles of Tommy's heart were being stimulated, but his heart was not beating. Paramedic Charles Donnellan.
Kids, they affect every guy on the job. There's no doubt about that. And if you have your own child that age,
with one son on the way to the hospital and another still missing, Tracy Martini was inconsolable. They had looked everywhere, and still there was no sign of Christopher. To Michael Moen, who had been searching the longest, it seemed like a controlled panic.
It felt like I was in the water for 2 hours and we couldn't find him. I know it wasn't 2 hours, but when you're looking around and you just have no clue. We had no clue where to look for him.
When the rescuers peered down into the water, all they could see was darkness. The only sense they had left was their sense of touch. Christopher could be just a few inches from their grasp, but they had no way of knowing it. More rescue teams arrived in exposure suits, ready to lend a hand. As the ice continued to break off and the hole continued to widen, rescuers turned a traditionally one-man rescue operation into a team effort. To avoid confusion, Moen divided the hole into a grid and restricted each rescuer to their own area.
When we were all out in the water, we were talking, well, why don't we try a search pattern across the area? Go back across that grid in the area where we thought we could find him. We're just like yelling to each other, giving hand signals, try this, do that. You know, it was organized chaos.
The rescuers were frustrated. Nothing seemed to be working. Christopher had been submerged under the ice for over 25 minutes, and they still had no way of reaching him. A frozen pond became a lethal trap for two young boys. They were brothers, one risking his life to save the other. Rescuers from the Warwick, Rhode Island Fire Department had pulled one boy from the frigid waters, but he showed no signs of life. The emergency team had to get Tommy Martini breathing again, get his heart started, and begin warming his body. Despite the grim outlook, paramedic Richard Bellavance kept trying to revive the 9-year-old.
I don't recall any time when we actually gave up hope thinking that he's not going to make it. We just had it in our mind that we were going to continue our treatment and bring this patient to a hospital emergency room where the doctors would do their best to continue treatment and hopefully some miracle would happen and he'd be revived.
Tommy's brother Christopher remained lost somewhere at the bottom of the pond. The rescuers were hampered by their exposure suits, which kept them floating on the surface. They had to find some way of probing deeper. A fire truck arrived with a possible solution. A rescue pole with a loop on the end. The pole would allow Michael Moen to reach the bottom of the pond. He hoped to snag Christopher's arm or leg in the loop and pull him to the surface. But first, he had to find him. At Hasbro Children's Hospital, attending physician Dr. Mark Shapiro quickly assessed Tommy's condition.
His cardiac monitor showed some cardiac activity at a slow rate, but there was no pulse. So basically, he had no circulation when he arrived. We're going to need a bear hugger. If we can get a bear hugger in here, we're going to need to get a core temperature on Tommy.
Tommy's temperature was 87, more than 11 degrees below normal. To get Tommy's circulation going, the team covered him with a special blanket inflated with heated air.
Okay, let's hold CPR for a second. Let's take a look at what his rhythm is.
The cardiac monitor showed Tommy's heart wasn't contracting. Dr. Linda Snelling, chief of pediatrics, was troubled by his condition.
If a child arrives with a heartbeat, their outcome is likely to be relatively good. Not guaranteed, but if a child arrives without a heartbeat, the chances that they're going to leave the hospital alive are small, and the chances that if they do live, they're going to lead a normal life are minuscule.
I don't have a pulse. Yeah, it definitely looks like PEA. Go ahead and restart CPR. Let's go ahead and give him 0.01 per kilo of epi.
In an effort to start a rhythm, the team injected Tommy with drugs to stimulate his heart.
Any parents with him or family members with him? No. Okay.
They continued giving him warm oxygen and warm IV fluids to heat his body from the inside out. As rescuers continued to search for Christopher, they had one hope for his survival: the mammalian diving reflex. This automatic body response slows the heart down and keeps blood flowing to the body's most vital organs, the lungs and brain. The reflex is strongest in young children.
The cold water is beneficial because it slows down the metabolic processes. It slows down the requirement for oxygen on the part of the brain. It slows down a lot of the organs, and that slows down the damage that can be done by lack of oxygen.
Firefighter Michael Moen swept the area, pushing the rescue pole deeper and wider, hoping it would reach far enough to hook Christopher. But Moen was tiring. He had been searching for over 20 minutes.
All right, let's take another look. Something like that. Still no pulse. Looks like we might have some fine VF here.
Tommy's heart had still not started to beat. He required even more medications.
Typically, most of the drugs and electrical therapy we use to restore the heart to a normal beat would not function because the patient is so cold. So you have to be extremely careful with these children to do everything gently and to not irritate their hearts. That looks like it might be VF. Let's prepare to shock him.
Finally, Tommy's body had rewarmed enough to try starting his heart using a defibrillator.
Everybody clear, please. Look back. Clear. Everybody clear. Okay. Defibrillator.
It didn't work.
Let's recheck here. Still don't have anything. Okay, let's resume CPR. Keep bagging him. 0.01 per kilo.
With all his strength, Moen swept the pole along the bottom. He hit something. Not sure what it was, he moved closer.
Looking good.
The young boy had been under the water for almost 30 minutes. Moen immediately began to perform CPR on the lifeless boy. Tracy Martini watched as her youngest son was taken out of the water and pulled ashore. Christopher showed no signs of life. The paramedics wanted to continue CPR, but Anthony Mello knew they had to warm the body as quickly as possible.
At this point, we're just trying to get him to the truck. We know what we have to do. We can't stop to do it right there. We need to get him in the truck. He was extremely blue and lifeless. He was like a rag doll. At that point, we initiated basic life support. We started CPR. We started ventilating, doing chest compressions. We did our best to get his clothes off as quickly as possible. We cut every stitch of clothing off of him, and we grabbed our towels and dried him off to try to prevent any further cooling of the body. We were able to quickly put an IV in, which was a major feat, taken into account this child is extremely cold and their veins have just closed off.
Christopher was clinically dead. He was still not breathing, and he had no pulse.
I was controlling meds, IV, and EKG. The child remained flatline the entire way to the hospital.
As they approached the hospital, Mello saw on the monitor what he thought might be heartbeats.
They were very few and very infrequent, and I actually thought they were from the bumps in the road.
Mello sensed Christopher's heart was trying to beat on its own, but the bumpy road was interfering with the monitor.
Once we stopped, we could see it. We realized that he had a heartbeat, you know. It was not enough to sustain life.
It was an encouraging sign, but for the team struggling to revive the two brothers, it was only the beginning. Rescuers from the Warwick, Rhode Island Fire Department had pulled two brothers from a frozen pond. Neither of the boys showed any signs of life, but the emergency team refused to give up. At Hasbro Children's Hospital in Providence, doctors inserted a catheter into Tommy Martini's bladder, flushing his body with warm saline solution in an effort to raise his body temperature. As they kept trying to restart the boy's heart, the ER staff prepared for the arrival of Tommy's 7-year-old brother, Christopher. Dr. Slim Sooner, chief resident in emergency medicine.
Now we have two patients who appear to be dead, who are being resuscitated in this room. It's hectic. There are multiple nurses, physicians, and there are teams working on each patient.
Look here.
Tensions are high.
Let's let George go ahead and tube him, and you can just do frankly.
Christopher was severely hypothermic.
We're gonna go with 30 kilos for his weight, CPR.
His core temperature was 85 degrees, 13 degrees below normal. Doctors immediately administered medications to stimulate his heart.
Warm fluid, let's make sure that all arriving.
The team then tried to warm Christopher by irrigating his stomach and bladder with warm fluids.
French Foley's in. You want me to still warm fluids in?
In one sense, we knew that the medications we were giving him were not going to work because they don't work when the body is that cold. On the other hand, we had to do something.
After the epinatropine, we're going to go with Bertilium. Going to have 5 milligrams per kilo of Bertilium in until we get.
It's got another line in. Still no pulses. What have we done to rewarm him?
Okay, let's check his rhythm again. What do we have for rhythm? Okay, we're going to shock V-fib.
The team tried to shock Christopher's heart into beating using a defibrillator, but it wasn't working.
Still V-fib. What do we have?
Christopher had not sufficiently rewarmed to allow his heart to begin beating.
Breath down, sound equal, continue CPR.
To increase his core temperature, doctors covered him with a blanket filled with heated air.
Did you get the bicarb yet?
Attending physician, Dr. Mark Shapiro.
Let's go for one more round of.
You're in the back of your mind thinking, boy, I hope I can resuscitate these children, and if they both die, how devastated the family is going to be. I think it adds even more emotion to an already emotionally charged situation.
When Tracy Martini arrived at the ER, all she wanted to hear was that Tommy and Christopher were alive
I need to know.
and recovering. All the staff could tell her is they were doing everything they could. The ER team felt there was hope because the boys had drowned in cold water. Dr. Monica Kleinman, a physician in pediatric intensive care.
This was different than other resuscitations that we had done, and certainly that was on the minds of everybody in that emergency department, who continued to resuscitate these kids far longer than we would resuscitate someone who had a normal body temperature or who had drowned under very different circumstances.
Doctors continued to rewarm Christopher.
Got a 28 French chest tube in the right chest.
They placed tubes in his chest and filled them with warm water. This would heat the body from the inside out by raising the temperature of the blood nearest his heart and lungs. Once Tommy's temperature had reached 92 degrees, his heart began to beat regularly.
We have I'm not sure, it's faint, but I think we do have a pulse here. Okay?
Okay,
We're going to
all
get
right.
up there where they can take care of him.
An hour after he had fallen through the ice, he was moved to the intensive care unit.
Equal breath sound. Okay, continue CPR.
Christopher's heart repeatedly started and stopped.
Stop CPR, let's look at a rhythm.
Doctors had to establish a steady rhythm.
Okay, monitor, check a pulse.
No pulse.
Okay, still about the same, right? Still be fib. 80 joules, please.
Charging to 80. Clear?
All charged.
Finally, they detected a weak pulse. Both boys now had heartbeats.
They were by no means stable, though. Stable only in that we didn't have to do CPR anymore. They still weren't warm enough because their hearts were still irritable from the cold temperature, and they could have gone back into a bad rhythm.
3 hours after Christopher's arrival at the hospital, Dr. Monica Kleinman received him in the intensive care unit. Both boys were in critical condition and placed on respirators. Their lungs were swollen and stiff, incapable of taking in much oxygen. Fluid was leaking into Christopher's lungs, a side effect of his near drowning. Doctors were forced to periodically disconnect him from the ventilator and drain the liquid.
The fluid that they had coming from their lungs was very bloody, and so we were using very high settings on the ventilators to essentially hold back the fluid and try to keep the lung sacs open enough that some oxygen could be exchanged. So the risk is that you'll essentially pop one of the lungs, and on the settings that we were using, that certainly seemed likely.
Dr. Kleinman was finally able to inform Tracy Martini of Tommy and Christopher's condition. She told her that although they were still unconscious, their body temperature had returned to normal and their circulation had improved. Kleinman cautioned Tracy that they faced a long and difficult road to recovery.
We're very good at resuscitating, but if damage has already been done, we can't undo it. We were hopeful, though, that because of the hypothermia, that their brains had been protected, and there was no way we could tell until we waited to see what happened.
Tracy was finally allowed to see her sons. Tommy had the least amount of lung damage and began to show signs of improvement during the night. Christopher was the doctor's greatest concern.
Christopher continued to have problems with his heart. He was very weak and needed a lot of extra support. And his kidneys failed, and he needed to be put on dialysis. And it felt like a daunting task to try to stabilize him because basically every body system was failing.
At some point, if Christopher failed to improve, his mother would have to decide whether to discontinue life support. A Rhode Island medical team brought two young boys back from the dead. They were brothers, one risking his life to save the other after he had fallen through a frozen pond. Emergency teams managed to resuscitate the boys, but they remained comatose, struggling for life. No one knew when, if ever, they might recover. Their mother kept a vigil by their beds, hoping her voice would help bring them back. The boys' classmates stayed after school to make blue bows expressing their sympathy. The children tied 2 love knots in each bow to represent Tommy and Christopher. The PTA sold the bows to raise funds for the family. Tommy's class recorded Christmas carols and personal messages, hoping it would help him recover. Trying to wake Tommy from his coma, Tracy played Get Well wishes his classmates had recorded.
I miss you, and I hope that you...
Dr. Linda Snelling.
I think having devoted family members, they were talking to these children all the time. Wake up, don't leave me. That has to help. Whether you think a child's conscious or not, that has to help.
In the next room, Tommy's brother was losing his battle for life. Dr. Snelling told Tracy to prepare for the worst.
We really never got to see if he could wake up. He was never to a point where we could even find out because his body had been so ravaged that we couldn't get his organs to recover.
Christopher had languished 8 days in a coma when doctors recommended they stop treatment.
No mother wants to think that their child's not going to survive. But it was getting to the point where it wasn't going to matter whether we stopped treatment or not. It was going to be taken out of our hands.
Tracy made the decision to end the treatments that were keeping her 7-year-old boy alive. She stayed with Christopher as he breathed on his own for 40 minutes and then passed.
Everyone felt a sense of defeat and a tremendous sense of loss. And this had been something that people had been working and putting their heart and souls into for 8 days. And we felt like we knew this child, we knew this family, and everybody wanted him to get better. Plus, we knew his brother was recovering, and so it just, it just felt unfair.
As Tommy's condition stabilized, doctors moved him out of intensive care. Tracy kept watching and waiting for him to recover.
Nurse!
And then, on December 19th, Tommy started to awake from his coma.
He's warm. What is it?
When Tommy started to move and started to come around, everybody, regardless of who they were caring for that day, everyone was thrilled. I mean, it was ecstatic that he was moving.
One of Tommy's first visitors was his best friend, Eddie Cadonian.
When Tommy woke up, he couldn't do much. He couldn't talk, he could barely move. But I remember when I first walked in the door and he had a huge smile on his face when he saw me. And I was just glad he was alive.
2 months after he fell through the ice, Tommy Martini was released from the rehabilitation center. Although his speech was halting and he needed physical therapy to learn to walk again, he had survived. Today, Tommy is attending high school and working a part-time job. Rescuers will never forget the significance of that day.
Those children were pulled from that pond lifeless. They were dead. That is a true miracle that we were able to revive one of those kids, and he's still walking around today.
To help prevent such tragedies in the future, the Warwick Fire Department organized a scuba diving team. They also started an outreach program aimed at teaching children ice safety.